In a quiet town nestled between sprawling hills, there was a young woman named Emily. She had an unassuming charm, simple yet radiant, with a softness in her voice and a kind-heartedness that won over nearly everyone she met. Despite her family's wealth, Emily led a modest life. She believed in simple pleasures, far more interested in art and nature than in luxury. Her world, up until recently, revolved around her husband, Michael, whom she adored. Michael, on the other hand, was a man of ambition, perhaps too much so. Tall and sharply dressed, he presented himself with a refined elegance that belied his humble beginnings. The couple met in college, where Michael quickly fell for Emily's gentle spirit, finding comfort in her warmth and simplicity. At the time, his own ambitions were still forming, and her calm nature had seemed to balance out his own restlessness. When they married, Emily believed she'd found her forever partner, someone who cherished her heart as much as she cherished his. Then there was Sophie, Emily's younger sister. Sophie had always been striking, with a spark of confidence that captivated others effortlessly. Where Emily was quiet and reflective, Sophie was spirited and outspoken, often the life of any gathering. Though their personalities were different, the sisters shared a close bond, each respecting the other's unique traits. Sophie had her own ambitions, dreams of traveling the world, living in the best cities, and experiencing life to the fullest. Yet, her loyalty to Emily was deep-rooted, and she held her older sister in high regard. Though their family was wealthy, little was known about the exact details of the inheritance. Their father, a shrewd businessman, kept his cards close to his chest. He believed that life's privileges should be earned, and so he seldom spoke of the fortune, preferring his daughter's focus on building meaningful lives rather than relying on wealth. Still, everyone in the family was quietly curious about the inheritance's future, especially Sophie, who assumed her ambitions and her drive would position her well to inherit the family's empire. Emily and Sophie had never let the family's wealth come between them. For Emily, love and loyalty mattered far more than riches. She believed that whatever came their way, they would handle it together. But the balance was fragile, and unbeknownst to her, this peace would soon be shattered by a revelation that would test not only her marriage but the very bond she shared with her sister. As the years passed, Michael's ambitions grew sharper, and the allure of wealth began to cloud his original intentions. His fascination with Emily's simplicity had dulled, replaced by a quiet frustration with their modest lifestyle. He wanted more prestige, more power, more of the luxuries he saw others enjoying. And yet, bound by the limits of their lifestyle, Michael felt as though his potential was shackled, his dreams restrained by Emily's contentment with the simple life. This frustration wasn't something he ever shared openly, but it slipped into his actions and words in subtle ways. He began nudging Emily to consider higher ambitions, often dropping hints about moving to a larger house or suggesting she push her father to invest in their future. Emily, confused but trusting, brushed it off as Michael's way of keeping their lives interesting. She laughed off his insistence that she aim higher, believing that his dreams and hers could somehow meet in the middle. One evening, however, Michael's life took an unexpected turn. While passing by the study during a family gathering, he overheard a conversation between Emily's father and his business partner. His ears perked up at the mention of Sophie's name, and he slowed his steps, curiosity getting the better of him. Hidden in the dim hallway, he listened as they spoke in low voices, unaware of his presence. Michael's eyes widened as he realized what he was hearing. Emily's father was talking about the family fortune and his plans for its future. To Michael's shock, it became clear that Sophie, not Emily, was designated to inherit the bulk of the wealth. Her father saw in Sophie the drive and ambition he believed necessary to manage their family's assets, traits he thought Emily lacked. Although Emily was dear to him, he'd chosen Sophie as the rightful heiress, the one he believed could carry on his legacy with strength and purpose. As Michael absorbed this revelation, a shift began within him. Emily was no longer the golden ticket he had once believed her to be. His feelings for her, already strained by his unfulfilled ambitions, soured further. Sophie, with her charisma and the promise of a lavish inheritance, suddenly shone with a new allure. A plan began to form in his mind, an idea that would lead him down a path he might have once deemed unthinkable. He started to rationalize his growing interest in Sophie, convincing himself that she, not Emily, was his true match. He told himself that he deserved a life that matched his ambitions, one of wealth and influence. Emily, with her modest ways, was simply not aligned with the life he envisioned for himself. This realization transformed Michael's desires, altering the dynamics of his relationships with both sisters in ways that would soon tear them apart. With his newfound knowledge of Sophie's inheritance, Michael's attitude toward Emily changed, though he did his best to keep his intentions hidden. Subtle signs began to emerge, moments that Emily noticed but couldn't quite understand. At first it was small things, Michael's laughter fading too quickly, his gaze shifting away whenever she spoke of simple joys like their quiet dinners or weekend strolls. His affection, once so sincere, felt hollow, leaving Emily to wonder if she was imagining the growing distance. He grew restless and distracted, often finding reasons to be away from home. When they were together, his questions were no longer about her happiness or the small intimacies they once shared. Instead, he would ask if she'd spoken to her father about investing in their future, or suggest she take on more responsibilities within the family, pushing her toward ambitions she had no desire to pursue. Emily felt a creeping sense of inadequacy, wondering if somehow she wasn't enough for him. She tried to be supportive, thinking that perhaps he was just stressed about his career or feeling unfulfilled in some way she couldn't grasp. Then came the unexplainable evenings when Michael would return late, vague about where he'd been. When she pressed him, he'd grow irritable, dismissing her concerns as unnecessary worry. "I'm just trying to make something more for us, Emily," he'd say, his tone cold. But his words felt distant, as though he was already far away, chasing something that no longer included her. In truth, Michael was spending more time with Sophie. He sought her out under the guise of casual visits or small favors, slipping in compliments and playing to her dreams of grandeur. He would praise her ambition, making her feel understood and admired. Sophie, charmed and unaware of his ulterior motives, began to look forward to his visits, finding comfort in his attention. She saw him as a supportive brother-in-law, someone who appreciated her in ways her own family often overlooked. Michael, meanwhile, was drawn deeper into his twisted pursuit. He found himself justifying his actions, assuring himself that Sophie was a better match for the life he envisioned. In her, he saw the possibilities he craved, the wealth, the power, the influence. She was vibrant, daring, and willing to chase after the very things that Emily dismissed as unimportant. His admiration grew with every interaction, erasing any guilt he might have felt for deceiving Emily. But Emily wasn't oblivious to the shifts around her. She noticed the way Sophie and Michael seemed increasingly at ease together, sharing private jokes and glances that excluded her. She tried to tell herself it was only her imagination, that her husband and sister could never betray her in such a way. Yet, doubt lingered in the back of her mind, casting shadows over every interaction. One evening, she watched as Michael whispered something to Sophie during a family dinner, the two of them laughing as though sharing a secret. Emily felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of confusion and pain, but when she tried to bring it up later, Michael brushed her off. "You're being paranoid, Emily. Sophie's family. I just want her to feel comfortable around us." Though his words were dismissive, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was slowly being pushed out of her own marriage, watching as Michael grew closer to her sister with each passing day. As Michael and Sophie's interactions became more frequent and more comfortable, Emily's sense of unease deepened. She found herself scrutinizing every exchange, every glance between them, replaying moments in her mind. She saw how Sophie's eyes lit up around Michael, how his hand would linger a second too long on her shoulder, or how they seemed to gravitate toward each other at family gatherings. Emily's heart, once so confident in her love, now twisted with anxiety and dread. One day, she decided to address it, hoping her fears would be soothed by Michael's reassurances. She waited for the right moment, catching him alone in their living room late at night. She could feel her voice trembling as she finally spoke. "Michael, I need to ask you something. Lately, I feel like you're distant. Not just with me, but it's as if you're closer to Sophie than to me." Her voice cracked, each word carrying the weight of her fears. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Michael's face hardened, and he let out an irritated sigh, as if annoyed by her concern. "Emily, don't be ridiculous," he said, dismissing her with a casual wave. "Sophie's your sister. I'm just trying to be friendly with her, make her feel at ease. You know how her personality is, she's outgoing, she likes attention. You should be happy she feels comfortable with me." But his words felt wrong, the irritation in his voice too harsh, the explanations too practiced. Emily's stomach churned, the familiar warmth of his presence replaced by an unshakable chill. She tried to respond, to tell him how much this change was affecting her, but he brushed her off, turning his attention back to his phone as if the conversation had ended. In the days that followed, Emily tried to quiet her doubts, reasoning that perhaps her imagination was to blame. She made efforts to be closer to Michael, suggesting they spend time together, but he always had some excuse, a work meeting, an errand to run, a last-minute commitment. More and more, she was left alone in their home, consumed by loneliness and an unsettling sense of abandonment. Emily, once full of quiet contentment, now felt as if she was losing her sense of security, watching the man she loved drift further away. Her suspicions peaked one afternoon when she caught a glimpse of Michael and Sophie together at a local cafe. She had come into town to pick up some groceries, and there, across the street, she saw them sitting by the window, leaning close, their heads bent in deep conversation. Emily froze, her heart pounding as she watched her husband laugh at something Sophie had said, his eyes bright with an ease she hadn't seen in a long time. She couldn't take it any longer. That evening, she confronted Michael, determined to get to the truth. "Michael, I saw you today. With Sophie. What's going on between you two?" Her voice trembled, desperation spilling out as she spoke. "Please, just tell me the truth." But Michael only rolled his eyes, his voice dripping with irritation. "Emily, for God's sake, stop being so paranoid. Sophie and I are family. It was just a coffee. Don't read into things that aren't there." His tone was cold, void of any compassion, as if her concerns were nothing more than a nuisance. Emily felt the weight of his words settle heavily on her, a bitter realization dawning within her. Despite his reassurances, the distance between them was undeniable, and her heart ached with the understanding that the man she loved might no longer love her in return. Her once stable world was unraveling, leaving her clinging to threads of hope that felt thinner with each passing day. The weeks that followed were marked by a growing chasm between Emily and Michael, one that she could no longer ignore. Despite her attempts to salvage their relationship, to bring back the warmth they once shared, Michael's indifference had become unyielding. It was as though her very presence had become a burden to him. And then, one evening, the unthinkable happened. Michael dropped the mask entirely. Emily was at home, preparing dinner, when Michael walked in, his face set in a look of resigned determination. She could sense something was wrong by the way he avoided her eyes, his body language cold and closed off. He paced back and forth before finally stopping, looking at her with an expression she had never seen before, one that was devoid of affection, devoid of warmth. "Emily," he began, his voice flat and emotionless. "There's no easy way to say this, so I'll be direct. I want a divorce. Emily's world came crashing down. The word felt like a physical blow, reverberating through her entire being. She stared at him, disbelief etched across her face, her hands trembling. Michael, why? What did I do wrong? He sighed, his eyes finally meeting hers, but there was no trace of love in them. It's not about what you did or didn't do. This just isn't the life I want. I need more. And I don't think you can give that to me. Before she could process his words, before she could try to reason with him, he delivered the final blow. I'm with Sophie now. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's mind struggled to make sense of his words, the betrayal sinking in slowly, painfully. With Sophie. Her voice cracked, and tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, hoping, praying, that this was some cruel misunderstanding. But Michael's face was unyielding, a look of calm conviction that shattered her last shred of hope. Yes, Emily. Sophie and I, we have something real, something that aligns with the future I want. She understands me in ways you can't. His words were cold, and each one felt like a dagger piercing through her heart. The reality of it hit her all at once. Her husband had not only betrayed her but had done so with her own sister, the one person she trusted and loved without reservation. Emily was left speechless, her body shaking as the weight of his betrayal crashed down upon her. In that moment, she felt the ground beneath her give way, leaving her in a dark, hollow place where trust, love, and family had all turned into something twisted and unrecognizable. That night, she packed a few belongings and left the home they had shared, unable to bear the thought of staying under the same roof. She found herself at a friend's house, numb and broken, replaying Michael's words over and over again, each repetition tearing at her heart. Days turned into weeks, and Emily kept her distance from her family, too shattered to face Sophie or confront the depths of her betrayal. Finally, unable to keep it all inside any longer, she arranged to meet Sophie. She needed answers. She needed to understand how the person she had trusted so implicitly could have betrayed her in such a brutal way. They met in a quiet park, far from prying eyes. Sophie's face was pale, guilt and regret evident in her expression, but Emily was beyond pity. She looked at her sister with a hardened gaze, feeling the anger that had built up over weeks fuel her words. How could you, Sophie? Her voice was filled with a raw pain that cut through the air. You were my sister. My family. How could you do this to me? Sophie swallowed, struggling to find the words. Emily. I'm so sorry. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. Michael told me he was unhappy, that he felt trapped. And I believed him. I thought. Believed him. Emily's voice rose, incredulous. You believed him, so you decided to destroy my marriage? You let him manipulate you, let him turn you against me, for what, Sophie? For money? For status? Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but Emily couldn't bring herself to care. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too fresh. She had lost not only her husband but the sister she had loved unconditionally. As she looked at Sophie, she felt the final remnants of that bond dissolve, leaving nothing but a hollow ache in its place. In the aftermath of their confrontation, Emily knew she had to move forward, no matter how impossible it seemed. Her family, once a source of warmth and love, now felt like a distant memory tainted by betrayal. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life, drawing strength from the pain. She sought support from close friends, who rallied around her, helping her through the dark days. Piece by piece, she reclaimed her identity, one that was no longer defined by her relationships but by her own resilience and self-worth. Meanwhile, Michael's dreams of wealth and power didn't unfold as he'd imagined. At first, he and Sophie relished in the new relationship, convincing themselves that their betrayal was justified by the promise of a grand future together. But it wasn't long before cracks began to appear. Sophie, upon seeing the full extent of Michael's manipulation and selfishness, began to question her own choices. She realized that the man she had left her sister for was not the romantic, ambitious partner she'd envisioned, but a schemer whose primary love was wealth. Things took a turn when Sophie learned that the inheritance was conditional. Her father, deeply traditional and disappointed by the unfolding drama, revised his plans after Emily's departure, leaving Sophie's share reduced, with restrictions that would require years of oversight and commitment. Sophie was shocked. All that she and Michael had sacrificed suddenly felt hollow, a price far higher than any fortune was worth. Michael, who had abandoned his marriage and integrity for a promised wealth that was now slipping through his fingers, grew bitter and resentful. The final straw came when Sophie discovered that Michael's affection for her had been largely performative. She confronted him, a mirror of the confrontation Emily had faced, demanding the truth. Under pressure, Michael's facade crumbled. His words were sharp and angry, admitting that his ambitions had always driven him. "I thought we could make something of this. I thought you wanted the same things," he spat, his voice full of frustration and regret. Sophie, devastated and repulsed, realized she had lost not only her sister's love but her own self-respect. Sophie ended things with Michael, leaving him alone to grapple with the consequences of his choices. The life he'd envisioned, one of prestige and prosperity, was now a shadow, marked by his own actions. He was left isolated, his ambitions destroyed by his own betrayal and manipulation. Emily, on the other hand, found new purpose in her independence. She threw herself into creative pursuits, discovering a passion for writing and art that helped her process her emotions. With time, her pain transformed into strength, and she found herself looking forward rather than back. She surrounded herself with people who valued her genuinely, fostering a new circle of trust that healed her wounds. She came to understand that her worth had never been tied to Michael's approval or Sophie's friendship, but lay instead within her own resilience and compassion. As the years passed, Emily heard from mutual friends of Michael's fall from grace. Where once she might have been saddened by his misfortune, she now felt only a distant, quiet understanding. She had learned from her suffering, her heartbreak becoming the foundation of her rebirth. And in the end, Emily emerged stronger, wiser, and finally free from the shadows of betrayal that had once threatened to consume her. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Your support means everything, and I hope Emily's journey of resilience and self-discovery touched and inspired you. Remember, even in the darkest moments, we can find strength within ourselves to rebuild and rise above. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Your engagement helps us continue creating stories that resonate. Until next time, take care and stay strong.